The desert at night was never truly silent. Beneath the cool sweep of moonlight, the land hummed with an eerie stillness, broken only by the crackle of distant gunfire. Dust hung in the air like ash, stirred by every blast that ricocheted off stone and dirt. A Navy SEAL team lay pinned in the shadow of a half-collapsed wall, their bodies low, their breaths shallow. They were some of the finest operators in the world, but tonight they were trapped. The enemy held the high ground, a ridge laced with sharp rock and dark crags that made perfect cover. From up there, unseen rifles spat down mercilessly, locking the SEALs in place. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Kane, the team leader, crouched low, sweat stinging his eyes. He tapped his gums. "Any visuals?" he barked over the radio. "Negative," came the strained reply from Adams, their spotter. "They're ghosts. No heat signature steady enough. Every time we zero, they're already gone." The SEAL snipers, some of the most capable marksmen alive, had already taken their shots. Every bullet had struck dirt, rock, or empty shadows. Whoever they were fighting tonight knew the terrain like a second skin, shifting positions faster than satellites could track. Rounds slammed into the wall above Kane's head, splintering stone. A fine spray of grit peppered his face. He hissed through his teeth, ducking lower. "We're sitting ducks here." The men were good at hiding fear, but he saw it anyway in their eyes. They weren't used to being on the wrong end of precision. Whoever commanded that ridge was methodical, relentless, and calculating. And, unless something changed, his team was going to die on this valley floor. Then movement caught Kane's attention. From the rear of their improvised cover, someone shifted forward, someone who shouldn't have been there in the first place. Elena Ramirez. She wasn't in combat gear. No helmet, no tactical headset, no weapon slung across her back. Just desert fatigues, dust-stained and simple, with a small pack strapped tight. Her role on this mission was administrative logistics oversight, coordination, liaison with command. She was here to take notes, not bullets. Yet here she was, crawling forward into the storm of fire as if it were an afterthought. "Ramirez, get back," Kane snapped, grabbing her arm. His voice carried both command and desperation. "This isn't your fight." Her dark eyes met his, calm and unwavering. She didn't flinch under the rain of gunfire overhead. "It is now," she said quietly. Kane blinked. For a fraction of a second, he almost believed she didn't understand the stakes. But then he saw it in her face. Not recklessness, not ignorance, but certainty. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded. She nodded. At the sniper rifle leaning against the sandbags, its matte black barrel catching the moonlight. One of their shooters had abandoned it in frustration after another fruitless attempt. "Give me the rifle," Elena said. The SEALs exchanged looks in disbelief. A civilian? Picking up a sniper rifle in the middle of a live op? It bordered on insanity. "No chance," muttered Adams. "This isn't a damn firing range." Elena's tone didn't rise. She spoke evenly, her voice steady against the chaos. "I've trained Marines at Pendleton. I've spent years teaching them to hit targets they thought were impossible. You're pinned. You're losing men. I can help." Bullets shrieked overhead, striking so close the air seemed to vibrate. One round chewed a chunk out of the wall, inches from Kane's skull. He cursed under his breath. Every second wasted brought them closer to being overrun. He could see it, the ridge crawling with movement, shapes repositioning, preparing to flank. They were about to get slaughtered. Kane clenched his jaw. It was madness. But what choice did he have? He shoved the rifle across the dirt. "You've got one shot," he growled. "One." Elena slid the weapon close, her hands moving with practiced familiarity. She checked the chamber, adjusted the scope, and settled into position as though she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. The SEALs watched her, A mix of skepticism and something else they didn't want to name. Hope. Elena pressed her cheek against the stock, eyes narrowing through the glass. Her breathing slowed. The chaos around her dimmed, the shouting and gunfire fading to a distant hum. She counted the seconds between muzzle flashes on the ridge, traced the faint shadows that shifted against rock. There, a brief silhouette flared against the moonlight. Her finger curled on the trigger. She exhaled, slow, steady, perfect. The rifle cracked. For a split second, silence. Then, a body slumped backward on the ridge, tumbling against stone. The SEALs froze. "No way," Adams muttered. Elena didn't move. She worked the bolt smoothly, eyes never leaving the scope. Her world was reduced to crosshairs and movement. Another flash. Another breath. Another shot. Crack. Another figure dropped. This time, the SEALs didn't argue. They watched, spellbound, as the woman who wasn't supposed to be there began rewriting the outcome of the battle with each pull of the trigger. For Kane, time slowed. He felt his heartbeat thunder in his chest, yet everything outside the walls of his cover blurred. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A civilian doing what his best snipers had failed to do. The team's reality had just shifted, and deep down, Kane knew, if Elena Ramirez hadn't asked for that rifle, they would already be dead. The desert wind carried grit across the valley floor, whispering like an old ghost. Behind the ruined wall, the SEAL team crouched in stunned silence, their eyes glued to the woman now prone in the dirt, her body steady against the recoil of the long rifle. Elena Ramirez hadn't flinched. She hadn't questioned herself. 2 shots, 2 kills. And now, she was already hunting her third. Adams, the spotter, broke the silence first. She can't keep that up," he whispered, though even as he said it, his voice betrayed doubt. His own rifle sat useless at his side. Chief Kane's jaw was clenched so tight it ached. He wanted to dismiss what he was seeing, wanted to call it luck, coincidence, anything but what it was. Skill. Cold, unflinching, lethal skill. The kind his men trained decades to master. But Elena Ramirez wasn't SEAL. She wasn't even enlisted. She was a civilian, brought along as a logistics consultant. "Who the hell are you really, Ramirez?" Kane muttered under his breath. Elena didn't answer. Her breathing had slowed to a rhythm, her cheek pressed to the rifle's stock. She adjusted the elevation dial with delicate precision, like a musician tuning a violin. Through the glass, her eyes tracked flickers of motion invisible to everyone else. On the ridge, another muzzle flared. She fired a half-breath later. The target disappeared, a smear of movement tumbling backward into shadow. The SEALs stared. Adams exhaled, shaking his head. That's impossible." "No," Elena murmured, still watching the scope. "It's discipline. And patience." Her voice was calm, steady so at odds with the chaos around them that it made Kane uneasy. Most civilians folded under the weight of combat. They shook, they panicked, they froze. But Elena looked as though she'd been born here, in the crackle of gunfire and the bitter taste of dust. Kane crawled closer, his voice low but sharp. "You said you trained Marines. That doesn't explain this." Finally, she looked at him. Her eyes were dark and unwavering. "You train enough men to shoot," she said evenly. "You learn to see the world differently. Angles, distances, shadows. You learn to predict what others can't." She returned to her scope. "And you learn to act when no one else does." Kane didn't reply. He couldn't, because part of him knew she was right. A fresh wave of fire came from the ridge, sharper, more frantic. The enemy had realized someone down below was cutting them apart. Elena shifted positions smoothly, crawling to a new angle without breaking her rhythm. "Keep them busy," she told the SEALs, her tone like an order, though she technically had no rank. Kane hesitated, then signaled with 2 fingers. The seals rose just high enough to let off controlled bursts, drawing the enemy's attention, baiting them into showing themselves. Through her scope, Elena tracked the chaos. Every flash, every ripple of movement was an opening. She fired, and fired again. 5 shots. 5 bodies slumped on the ridge. The seals couldn't believe it. Even their best snipers would have struggled here. The ridge was littered with jagged rocks and shifting shadows, wind cutting across in unpredictable gusts. Yet Elena's shots were perfect, as if she had memorized the wind itself. Adams leaned close to Kane, whispering urgently, "Boss, I don't know what this is. Nobody shoots like that. Nobody." Kane kept his eyes on Elena. His instincts screamed at him to take control, to reassert order. But another part of him, the part honed by too many battlefields, recognized when a variable shifted the balance. And Elena Ramirez was no longer a variable, she was the fulcrum. The firefight began to slow. For the first time all night, the seals weren't pinned. They were breathing easier, leaning less into cover. But Elena wasn't satisfied. Her scope roamed higher up the ridge, her breath still measured, her fingers steady on the trigger. Then she spoke, almost to herself. "Leaders up there." Center ridge. Kane squinted into the dark. He saw nothing but rock and shadow. "You can't see that." "I can," she said simply. Before he could protest, she fired. The sound echoed through the valley, sharp and final. Up on the ridge, a figure toppled, arms flailing before disappearing into the dark. The gunfire faltered instantly. Confusion rippled through the enemy squad. Without their leader, their formation broke, their coordination unraveling like thread cut loose. Elena didn't pause. She worked the bolt again, her next target already in sight. Another shot, another fall. Kane felt a chill crawl down his spine. He'd been in combat long enough to know when momentum shifted. This wasn't just a shift, it was an overthrow. For years, he'd trusted the SEAL creed, that no one fought harder, trained sharper, shot truer. And yet here, in the dust and chaos of a desert ambush, a civilian woman had just turned the tide with a rifle she wasn't supposed to hold. He swallowed hard, unable to tear his eyes away from her. This was no accident. This was Elena Ramirez. And Kane knew, in his gut, that nothing about her was ordinary. Asterisk, the valley was alive with echoes. Each rifle crack rolled off the canyon walls, bouncing back like ghosts, mocking the living. Smoke drifted in thin veils, stirred by the night wind, mixing with the bitter tang of gunpowder. The SEAL team crouched lower, their ears ringing, their nerves fraying. But Elena Ramirez was still. Prone in the dirt, cheek pressed to the rifle, she moved with unnerving composure. Her body rose and fell in rhythm with her breath, her trigger finger slack until the exact moment it tightened. Around her, the chaos of battle blurred. For Elena, there was only the scope, the wind, and the math of death. "Draw their fire," she said flatly, as if ordering groceries. Chief Kane stared at her for a beat, then gave the hand signal. 2 operators popped up from cover, spraying bursts at the ridge, deliberately reckless. The enemy responded immediately, muzzle flashes sparking like angry fireflies against the rocks. And that was all Elena needed. Her finger twitched. Crack. One of the flashes went dark. The SEALs froze, watching through their goggles as a silhouette slumped. She's timing them," Adams whispered. His voice was hushed, reverent. "She's firing on their flashes." Crack. Another burst silenced. Another body collapsed. The SEALs were speechless. Shooting off muzzle flashes was something they joked about in training impractical, near impossible, and reserved for tall tailies told over whiskey. Yet Elena was doing it here, in real time, while under fire. Bolt, breath, squeeze. 3 enemies down in less than a minute. Jesus Christ, Kane muttered, though he wasn't sure if it was prayer or profanity. Helena didn't even blink. She cycled the bolt again, tracking. Her tone remained maddeningly calm. Keep them occupied. Make them panic. The operators obeyed, unleashing another controlled burst. The ridge erupted in frantic retaliation. Through the storm, Helena's eye tracked movement invisible to anyone else. A figure leaned too far, firing wildly. She exhaled. Crack! The man dropped like a puppet with strings cut. By now, disbelief was turning into awe. The SEALs, hardened men who had trained for years to master their weapons, were reduced to spectators. They had seen good shots, impossible shots, but this was different. This was surgical. Adams shook his head, muttering almost to himself. How the hell does she see them? They're ghosts up there. She doesn't see, Kane said slowly, realization dawning even as he spoke. She predicts. She knows where they'll be before they move. Elena said nothing. She was too focused, her body locked into the ritual of kill after kill. Her eyes never left the glass. Her breathing never faltered. 5 shots. 6, 7. With each impact, the ridge grew quieter, the enemy squad unraveling. What had been coordinated bursts became scattered pops, panicked and desperate. Their confidence was gone. They were prey now, and Elena was the hunter. But the fight wasn't over. From the far left, a fresh angle of fire erupted. Bullets zipped. Close, tearing splinters from the wall and forcing the SEALs lower. Someone had flanked wide. Kane ducked instinctively, cursing. New angle, left ridge. Elena shifted without hesitation. She didn't crawl, she flowed, sliding to her right, dragging the rifle with her. She flattened against a new mound of sandbags, angling her scope toward the fresh fire. Suppress, she ordered sharply. The SEALs obeyed, laying fire toward the left. The enemy answered, exposing themselves in brief flashes. Elena's scope locked in, her finger brushing the trigger like a painter stroking canvas. Crack! The left ridge went silent. A long, eerie pause filled the battlefield. Even the SEALs hesitated, unsure whether to breathe or hold the moment. Then shouting. Distant voices in a language most of them didn't know, drifting down from the ridge. Urgent, panicked, the enemy squad was breaking. They're rattled, Adams said, his eyes wide. They're finished, Kane corrected. His gaze flicked back to Elena. She hadn't moved from her scope, hadn't so much as lifted her head. Another muzzle flared, desperate, unsteady. Crack, silence. Elena's lips moved faintly. Not a smile, but something like it. Her hand steadied the rifle, her cheek still pressed tight. The world had slowed into precision and numbers. The chaos bent into a pattern she alone could read. For the SEALs, time dragged. Each second felt like a coin flipping between survival and death. But for Elena, it was music. The wind, the gunfire, the ricochet of stone, all part of the rhythm. Inhale, exhale, squeeze. The bolt slid back again, the chamber feeding her another round. And another target fell. By now, disbelief had given way to something heavier in the men's eyes. Respect. None dared interrupt her. None dared doubt her. They only watched, stunned, as a civilian woman brought here, for logistics, was dismantling a trained enemy. Squad with terrifying efficiency. Kane's mind reeled. He wanted answers. He wanted to know how many tours she'd done, what Black Ops program she'd been pulled from, what kind of training forged someone like this. But he knew he wouldn't get those answers now. All that mattered was that they were alive. And that survival belonged to her. Elena cycled the bolt one last time, and finally lifted her head from the scope. Her eyes scanned the ridge, dark and unreadable. Clear, she said softly. The valley fell silent. The SEALs sat in stunned stillness, their rifles slack, There, heart still hammering from the fight, none spoke. None needed to. They all knew what they had just witnessed. Not luck, not chance, but mastery. Cain wiped dust from his brow, staring at her like she was something otherworldly. Slowly, he nodded. "You kept us alive," he said, his voice low. Elena's expression didn't change. She simply set the rifle down, her hands steady. I did what needed doing. The others exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering to themselves. But one thought hung in every man's mind, unspoken yet undeniable. Even the SEAL snipers had missed. And she had not. The ridge was alive with panic. Shadows shifted frantically across the jagged rock formations as the enemy tried to regroup. They had no idea what had just happened. Half their squad lay sprawled across the dirt, dispatched by a woman they couldn't see. The rest scrambled for cover, voices high-pitched with fear, coordinating, arguing, but unable to bring order back to their chaotic formation. Below, the SEALs pressed their advantage. Even under heavy fire, they moved with discipline, suppressing the ridge, drawing attention, buying time. But all their calculations, experience, and precision paled in comparison to Elena Ramirez. Prone against the sandbags, the civilian's eyes never left her scope. Her hands were steady, the rifle an extension of herself. Every minor detail, the flicker of a sleeve, the reflection of moonlight off metal, the sway of a body, caught in mid-motion was captured in her peripheral awareness, integrated seamlessly into her decision-making. "Leaders moving again," she murmured, her voice low and deliberate. Cain leaned forward, squinting through the darkness. He could see nothing but stone and shadows. "You can't see him," he said, disbelief coloring his tone. "I can," she replied evenly. "And I'll hit him." A sharp muzzle flare lit the ridge. Elena exhaled slowly, fingers pressing in, unison with her heartbeat. The rifle cracked once, and the figure collapsed backward, tumbling into rocks. Silence rippled for a heartbeat before panic erupted. Like wildfire among the remaining enemies, Adams muttered under his breath, voice shaky. "It's like she knows where they're going before they even move." She didn't answer. Her world had narrowed into a single precise point of focus. One shot at a time, she was systematically unraveling the enemy squad. The enemy's flanks shifted desperately. They realized someone below was predicting every move. Their bullets screened past the SEALs, cutting clouds of sand and stone in midair, but Elena barely flinched. She crawled slightly to adjust her angle, exposing herself just enough to track the fleeing targets. The SEALs obeyed her earlier instructions. They laid down fire to distract, to bait, to confuse. And it worked. The flashes they forced from the enemy were timing beacons for Elena. 1, 2, 3 shots every target falling in a rhythm too precise to be luck. Cain's mind raced. He had trained hundreds of operators over decades. He had seen extraordinary marksmen, but nothing prepared him for this level of calculation under pressure. Even seasoned SEAL snipers would have struggled with the speed, the fluidity, the foresight. Elena's breathing was quiet, almost imperceptible. Inhale, exhale, alt, squeeze. Each sequence a silent symphony of lethal grace. Hold positions. She hissed softly, scanning the ridge again. Her scope picked up the faint glimmer of movement, a shadow just behind a crag. A sniper, attempting to flank, thinking they could approach unseen. Bolt slid back. Crack. Silence. The SEALs exhaled. Collectively, one by one, the remaining enemies were beginning to falter. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Leaders barked orders, but hesitation and fear spread faster than bullets. Cain watched Elena, noting the calm detachment on her face. She didn't celebrate, didn't revel in the kills. She simply observed, recalculated, and continued. There was no pride in her eyes, only the focus of a machine perfectly attuned to her environment. Suddenly, a new threat appeared, a cluster of enemies attempting a wide flanking maneuver from the far right, moving under cover of jagged rocks. The SEALs' bullets whistled past them, forcing their heads down. But they didn't scatter fast enough. Alana's eyes caught the subtle shift, the glimmer of movement, the fraction of a second that would expose them. Crack. One fell. Crack. Another went down. The flanking maneuver crumbled before it could gain momentum. The SEALs whispered among themselves in disbelief. She's unstoppable. No one should be doing this. Even the snipers. Kane's mind raced through tactical protocols. None applied here. Standard procedure would be to suppress, retreat, or engage as a unit. Yet Elena was operating outside of any standard he knew. She was predicting patterns, anticipating reactions, dismantling the enemy with near prescient skill. Minutes felt like hours. Every time the enemy thought they could regroup, she was already 3 steps ahead. Movement, exposure, reaction all mapped in her mind before the SEALs could blink. Adams, finally finding his voice, muttered, "It's like she can see the battlefield in her head. Like a chess game, every move calculated, every piece in place." "Yeah," Kane replied grimly. "And we're the pawns lucky enough to be on her side." Another wave of gunfire erupted, closer this time. One enemy had survived the earlier rounds and was firing indiscriminately toward the SEAL's position. Kane tensed, ready to move. Elena's voice cut through, calm and controlled. "Hold still. I've got him." She adjusted the scope for wind drift, calculated distance, and waited. Inhale, exhale. Crack. The rifle's report rolled across the canyon. The enemy went down, instantly neutralized. "Goddamn," Adams breathed. Kane shook his head. "I've been in firefights with men who'd been shot at 100 times and still stood. And she's rewriting the rules." The ridge fell into silence, broken only by the occasional snapping of rock as the remaining enemies scrambled to retreat. Confusion and terror had replaced coordination. Elena's calm presence had transformed the battlefield, turning fear into a weapon against the enemy themselves. She worked methodically, almost mechanically, moving slightly to improve angles, tracking targets, calculating distance, wind, elevation. Each shot precise, each movement deliberate. The SEALs, watching from their cover, were powerless but grateful. They had survived because of her skill, her focus, and her unflinching determination. Minutes later, Kane finally allowed himself a deep breath. He surveyed the valley and realized what had happened. The ridge that had pinned them, that had seemed impenetrable, was now empty. The enemy squad had been decimated, routed, or neutralized. He looked at Elena, finally standing upright, rifle slung over her shoulder. She didn't smile, didn't show pride, didn't celebrate. She simply brushed dust from her sleeves, as if she'd completed mundane work rather than fought a battle. The SEALs remained silent, awestruck, unable to form words. They had witnessed the impossible. A civilian woman, untrained in their protocols, had dismantled a trained, lethal enemy squad in mere minutes. Kane stepped closer. "You kept us alive," he said quietly. Elena shrugged, her face unreadable. "I did what needed doing." The SEALs didn't argue. They didn't cheer. They only nodded, silently acknowledging that tonight, survival had worn a face they had never expected. The ridge behind them was still. Dust swirled where shadows had fallen. In that quiet, Kane realized something he hadn't before. Sometimes, the unlikeliest person could become the difference between life and death. And tonight, that difference had a name. Elena Ramirez. The desert wind blew softly, carrying with It the faint echoes of gunfire and the scent of survival. The team had made it. But more than that, they had been reminded that in war, skill often comes from the most unexpected place, and Elena had just rewritten the rules. The ridge had fallen silent, but the valley beneath remained charged with tension. Dust swirled in slow spirals across the scorched sand, and the acrid smell of spent gunpowder lingered thickly in the air. For the SEAL team, every nerve screamed with adrenaline and disbelief. They had survived what should have been a massacre, and survived because of Elena Ramirez, a civilian who had just rewritten the rules of engagement. Chief Kane crouched low, his gaze sweeping the ridge. The enemy squad, once so coordinated, was now scattered, neutralized, and disoriented. Bodies lay motionless, their shadows cast grotesquely in the pale moonlight. Some had fled, stumbling blindly through the jagged rocks, lost in panic. Others had fallen to precision shots that had struck with surgical accuracy. All had underestimated the woman below. Elena moved carefully, her boots crunching lightly against sand and debris as she retrieved the rifle she had laid aside. Her movements were precise, deliberate, each action calculated, deliberate. She checked the chamber, wiped grit from the barrel, and ran her hands along the stock as if she were familiarizing herself with an old friend. The weapon had become an extension of her body, and in her hands, it had rewritten what the SEALs thought possible. Adams leaned forward, still holding his rifle, but watching her in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like that," he murmured. "I mean, the snipers, Kane. They're the best in the world. And she's something else," Kane interrupted, his voice low. He didn't know if he was expressing awe, relief, or fear. "We would be dead if not for her." He paused, scanning the valley floor. Every single shot deadly, calculated, and she didn't miss once. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. Not once. Elena, seemingly oblivious to their amazement, adjusted her scope slightly and scanned the horizon. Even in this moment, she was already considering angles, movement, and the remaining enemy. The battle was not yet over, not entirely. Survival demanded constant vigilance, and she had long ago internalized the principle that in combat, hesitation was fatal. "Check the perimeter," she ordered, her voice flat but commanding. The SEALs moved immediately, flowing through their trained motions. They had all witnessed the impossible, and now deferred to her judgment. She didn't demand respect, she earned it through skill. Minutes passed. The faint echo of distant gunfire indicated that some of the surviving enemy forces were attempting to regroup, though without coordination, they were easy prey. Elena's eyes flicked between the ridge and the valley floor, calculating trajectories, adjusting for wind, estimating distance with uncanny precision. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. One misstep, and it's over. She was talking about the enemy, but the truth was broader. One misstep in this operation could have destroyed them all. Every action had consequences. Kane crouched beside her. "How do you do it?" he asked, genuinely curious and still slightly incredulous. Even the best snipers missed these shots. "How did you—" Elena didn't answer immediately. Her focus remained sharp, her attention split between multiple invisible lines of sight. Then, finally, she spoke. "Experience, observation, patience. You spend years tracking patterns, predicting human behavior. You learn to see what others overlook, the twitch of a finger, the glint of a scope, the shift in shadow. And most importantly, you act when others hesitate." Kane absorbed her words silently. There was no arrogance, no posturing, only cold, clear reasoning. And beneath it all, a quiet intensity that seemed to radiate calm authority. He realized then that what they had just witnessed was not luck. It was methodical brilliance born of years of discipline. A sudden crack of movement drew their attention. Elena's eyes tracked it instantly, a pair of enemy combatants attempting to flee toward the far side of the ridge, thinking they could escape unseen. Her hand moved to the rifle instinctively. "Don't move," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. Crack. One fell. Crack. The other followed. The SEALs exhaled collectively. There was no cheering. There was no celebration. Only the quiet, profound acknowledgement that they had been saved by someone they had underestimated entirely. Kane lowered his gaze to Elena, noticing the faint tension in her shoulders. She didn't relax. She scanned again, every muscle coiled in readiness. In combat, you could never truly let your guard down. And she had learned that lesson long ago. "Clear," she said at last. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of authority. She finally set the rifle down, brushing dust from her sleeves, her expression neutral. To her, the action was routine, a task completed, a problem solved. To everyone else, it was nothing short of extraordinary. Adams shook his head, incredulous. "We're alive because of her. Entirely alive. That was unreal." Kane finally allowed himself a deep breath, scanning the valley for any remaining threats. "Unreal doesn't cover it," he muttered. "She didn't just survive. She won this for us." The SEALs moved to consolidate their position, taking stock of ammunition, checking for injuries, and securing the perimeter. Yet even as they did so, their thoughts lingered on Elena. She had operated outside their standard protocols, outside the rules they had trained to obey, and yet she had succeeded with a precision that left them in awe. For Elena, the mission was far from over. While the immediate threat had been neutralized, the principles she lived by demanded vigilance. Every action on a battlefield had consequences, and one miscalculation could undo everything they had fought to achieve. She moved through the terrain methodically, her senses alert to even the slightest hint of danger. Kane watched her, recognizing the rare combination of intuition and training that made her unique. "We've seen skill," he said quietly, "but this is something else entirely." Adams nodded. "No one should be capable of that. Not like that. And she's just there, in the middle of it, calm as stone." Elena finally allowed herself a brief glance at the SEALs. "We need to extract before more arrive," she said. "Nightfall doesn't protect the valley. It hides threats we haven't accounted for." Her voice was calm, but beneath it was a sharp edge of urgency. Experience had taught her that survival was not just about killing. It was about knowing when to move, when to strike, and when to retreat. Kane stepped closer. "Elena, you did something tonight that none of us will forget. You've changed the outcome of all of it." She merely nodded. "I did what had to be done," she repeated. The words were simple, but laden with meaning. They didn't reflect ego or pride, only the cold, unyielding focus of a professional who understood the stakes. As the SEAL team began to withdraw, moving with their practiced efficiency, Kane kept one eye on Elena. The night around them was quiet, the ridge silent save for the distant echo of footsteps retreating into the desert. For the first time, Kane felt the gravity of what had just occurred. A woman who was supposed to be a civilian had rewritten the rules of engagement. She had taken lives with precision no one could question, and she had done so without hesitation, without panic, without fear. The valley, now bathed in the pale light of the rising moon, seemed almost peaceful. Yet beneath the surface lay the remnants of chaos, the echoes of gunfire, the disarrayed enemy, the sharp reminders of mortality. For the SEALs, it was a night they would never forget. For Elena, it was just another operation, another calculation in a career defined by focus and discipline. As they moved toward extraction points, Kane finally spoke again. "You've set a standard tonight, Elena. Something we'll be talking About for years. Her eyes were steady, expression calm. Standards are only useful if they save lives, she said. Then, without waiting for further discussion, she led the team toward the extraction route. Her movements confident, precise, an unshakable dot. And in that desert night, under the silent watch of the stars, the legend of Elena Ramirez, the civilian, who had outshot SEAL snipers and dismantled an entire enemy squad, was quietly born. The extraction helicopter kicked up a storm of dust, its blades chopping the night air into a deafening roar. The SEAL team moved quickly toward it, Elena at the center, rifle slung casually over her shoulder, dust covering her uniform, but not diminishing the aura of calm that clung to her. She moved with purpose, eyes scanning the desert floor for any sign of lingering threats. Even after dismantling an entire enemy squad, her vigilance remained unbroken. Kane followed, keeping pace, his mind still replaying the sequence of shots, the precision, the uncanny prediction of enemy movements. "I still can't believe what I saw tonight," he murmured. "Even the best-trained snipers, none of them could do that." Adam shook his head, still pale, adjusting his gear nervously. "Unreal. Absolutely unreal. It's like she could read their minds. Every move, every flash, every twitch, it was all in her head before it even happened." Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The evidence of her skill was already written across the desert floor in the form of incapacitated enemies and a SEAL team that had survived against impossible odds. As the helicopter lifted off, the team took stock of the valley. Moonlight reflected off the jagged rocks, revealing the scattered remains of what had been a well-coordinated enemy position. Cries of retreat and confusion drifted faintly on the wind from the distant hills. The remaining combatants were disorganized and broken, their morale destroyed by the unseen hand that had orchestrated their downfall. The flight back to base was tense but quiet. The SEALs sat in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts, replaying the battle in his head. Even after hours of reflection, disbelief clung like a second skin. They had trained for years for impossible scenarios, yet nothing in their experience had prepared them for the methodical precision of Elena Ramirez. At base, word had already spread. Rumors raced through the command center like wildfire. The civilian who outshot SEAL snipers. She took an entire enemy squad alone. Impossible, but true. Officers and enlisted personnel alike whispered in corridors, exchanging incredulous glances. Even veterans who had seen decades of combat were astounded. Higher command wasted no time. A series of urgent calls and encrypted messages pulled Elena aside within hours. Kane accompanied her, though she seemed unfazed by the attention. She had performed her duty, and in her mind, that was sufficient. Recognition and fame were trivial. What mattered was survival and mission success. Colonel Whitman, a stern officer with decades in special operations, greeted her in the briefing room. His gaze was sharp, appraising. "Elena Ramirez," he said, voice measured. "We've reviewed the reports. We've interviewed the SEAL team. Every detail confirms what seems impossible. Explain to me how a civilian neutralized an entire enemy squad while under fire." Elena stood tall, her posture calm, hands clasped in front of her. "Sir," she said evenly, "I did what needed to be done. I've trained Marines for years in marksmanship and tactical observation. I applied the same principles tonight. Predict patterns, anticipate movement, maintain composure, and act decisively. That's all there is to it." The colonel raised an eyebrow. "That's it? No embellishment? No heroic flourish?" "No, sir," Elena replied simply. "I do not measure success by glory, only by results." There was a long pause. Colonel Whitman studied her carefully. Her demeanor, her calm, The precision of her language, it all suggested the sort of professional competence that could change outcomes in life or death scenarios. Finally, he nodded. Very well. You've earned a place in our records. Your actions tonight will be studied as a tactical case study for years to come. Exceptional performance by anyone's standard. Elena acknowledged the recognition with a quiet nod. She was not one to seek accolades, but the validation was noted. She understood the importance of the precedent she had set not for herself, but for future operations and personnel. Meanwhile, the SEALs watched in awe. Kane leaned toward her, lowering his voice. You've set a new benchmark. Nobody we've worked with has ever done what you just did. Ever. Elena simply shrugged. I did what had to be done. That's all. Word of her performance quickly spread beyond the immediate team. Reports reached Pentagon channels, where officers, analysts, and trainers marveled at the data. Here was a civilian, embedded purely in a support role, executing precision marksmanship and battlefield strategy at levels that rivaled elite operatives. Discussions erupted about training, selection, and whether such extraordinary skill could be cultivated or whether Elena's success was a rare, once-in-a-generation phenomenon. Back on base, the SEAL team processed the night's events. They ran simulations, replayed the sequences, and tried to analyze how one individual had so decisively shifted the battle. Every explanation fell short. Elena's skill was not merely technical, it was cognitive, anticipatory, instinctual, and terrifying in its efficiency. Even in private, the soldiers who had fought alongside her couldn't fully articulate the awe they felt. They had trained for impossible odds, yet in this engagement, they were spectators to a performance that defied every standard they had ever measured. For Elena, there was no pride, only reflection. The operation had succeeded, the team survived, and the enemy was neutralized. That was enough. Yet she couldn't ignore the realization that her actions had already begun to change the perceptions of what civilians, advisors, or any support personnel could accomplish in combat situations. Over the next few days, she participated in debriefings, tactical reviews, and strategy sessions. Each time, she recounted her approach with clarity, without exaggeration. She explained her methods for pattern recognition, target anticipation, and precision engagement. Officers and enlisted alike were fascinated, taking notes furiously. Her expertise, once regarded as merely auxiliary, was now in high demand. Kane observed quietly. He knew that Elena had already left an indelible mark, not just on the battlefield, but on everyone who had witnessed her in action. The SEALs were trained to adapt, to respect skill and efficiency, but what Elena had demonstrated transcended training. She had redefined it. And yet, in her eyes, this was simply another day's work. Calm, measured, and resolute, she remained the same person who had walked onto the battlefield hours earlier, a civilian in name, but a master in skill. Even as the base buzzed with discussion, Elena quietly returned to her routines. She reviewed equipment, organized logistical details, and offered guidance to operators. She did not seek recognition, only competence. And yet, everywhere she moved, whispers followed. Stories of her night in the desert circulated rapidly. The civilian who outshot the SEAL snipers. The woman who took an entire enemy squad alone. Unbelievable, but confirmed. Over time, her reputation grew. Officers requested her presence at tactical seminars. Training programs began including her insights on observation, anticipation, and precision. Soldiers and Marines sought her guidance, eager to understand the methods that had so decisively altered a battlefield. Through it all, Elena remained unchanged. She did not relish attention. She did not boast. For her, the battlefield was a place of necessity, discipline, and responsibility, not glory. And yet, The world around her had begun to shift, taking notice of someone who had demonstrated that exceptional skill could exist in unexpected places. Kane, watching from a distance during one briefing, realized that the team's survival, the enemy's defeat, and the lessons learned would echo for years. "She didn't just save us," he murmured to Adams. "She changed how we think about every mission from here on out." Adams nodded silently. "Yeah, and she did it like it was nothing." Elena sat quietly, reviewing maps, charts, and operational notes. For her, tonight's battle was not an extraordinary feat. It was merely the application of skill, focus, and preparation. But to everyone else, it was legend. The desert had tested her, the SEALs had witnessed her, and the military had taken notice. And in that quiet recognition, Helena Ramirez's place in history, quiet, unassuming, yet undeniable, was secured. The base was quiet now, the hum of machinery and distant chatter filling the spaces between moments of reflection. Helena Ramirez walked alone along the edge of the training grounds, her boots scuffing the dusty concrete. Her mind replayed the desert night, each shot, each decision, each heartbeat. Survival, precision, and observation had dictated every movement. But what came next required a different kind of calculation, one not measured in bullets and targets, but in strategy and consequence. Chief Kane approached from behind, his silhouette sharp against the low orange glow of the setting sun. "You're quiet," he said, matching her pace. "Most people would be celebrating after what you did, not you." Elena didn't break stride. "There's nothing to celebrate," she replied evenly. "I acted. I survived. The team survived. That is enough." Kane glanced at her, noticing the calm in her expression, the same calm that had unnerved enemies and inspired allies. "Enough. For you," he said softly. "Maybe. But the rest of the world sees it differently. Pentagon's calling it extraordinary. They want debriefs, reports, even strategy sessions. Some are talking about putting you into advisory positions for future ops." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, thoughtful. "Advisory positions?" "Yes," Kane replied. "You've shown skills that could benefit countless missions. They want you teaching, guiding, sharing the methods you used. They're intrigued." Intrigued? The word seemed insufficient. Elena understood their fascination. She had trained Marines and watched patterns, predicted movements, and made decisions that changed outcomes. But the attention felt intrusive. She had acted out of necessity, not ego. And now, suddenly, she was a resource, a symbol, a benchmark. "They don't understand," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They see results, but not the preparation behind them. Not the hours spent analyzing behavior, reading the wind, the shadow, the movement. They only see outcomes." Kane didn't reply immediately. He understood more than most. "They'll try to formalize you," he said finally. "Make you part of the system. But you've operated outside the system before. And it worked." Elena's gaze drifted toward the horizon, the fading light casting long shadows across the base. "I've always preferred autonomy," she said. "Structure slows action. Bureaucracy delays results. And in combat, hesitation kills." Kane nodded slowly. He had watched her dismantle an enemy squad with precision no protocol could account for. He knew her reasoning was sound. Yet he also saw the potential impact, the ability to teach others, to save countless lives, to influence missions in ways he could only imagine. A distant call from the base's tactical office broke their contemplation. Officers were assembling debrief materials, simulations, and tactical assessments. Kane glanced back at the approaching figures, and then at Elena. "They want you. You'll have a choice." She looked at him steadily. "Choice," she echoed. "Yes, always choice. The next days were a blur of briefings, simulations, and evaluations. Elena observed quietly, offering insights where appropriate, correcting misconceptions, and demonstrating methods for prediction, target prioritization, and environmental awareness. Officers and trainers were fascinated. Even seasoned SEALs attended sessions, absorbing lessons from someone they had once dismissed as a civilian. Her instincts are remarkable, one operator whispered to Kane during a simulation review. She sees angles, positions, patterns that none of us even consider. And she's calm, always calm. Kane nodded. Calm, yes. But more than that, she adapts, predicts, acts with precision. The combination is terrifying. Elena didn't take credit. She showed, she explained. She taught but never boasted. Her focus was the operation, the outcome, the mission. And yet, the ripple effect of her influence was undeniable. Every seminar she led, every analysis she provided, shifted the understanding of what a trained operative could achieve. One afternoon, a high-ranking officer approached her with a formal proposal. Elena, the Pentagon would like to consider you for an elite advisory role. You'd be embedded with operations, training units, and potentially deployed in a supervisory capacity for high-risk missions. Your skill set is unprecedented. We want to formalize it. Elena listened carefully, considering the implications. It was tempting, the recognition, the influence, the ability to shape operations on a grand scale. But she weighed it against her own principles. Autonomy was crucial. She thrived outside the rigid structure of hierarchy, able to act decisively, without delays or interference. Thank you, she said finally, measured and calm. I will consider it. But my terms will be clear. Autonomy in decision-making, freedom to act as required by the mission, and respect for the methodology I employ. Without that, there is no value in formal integration. The officer paused, considering her words. Understood, he said. We'll respect your conditions. But you should know, the demand for your methods is enormous. Others will want to replicate them, and the need is urgent. Elena nodded, her gaze distant. Replication can teach skill, she said softly. But it cannot replicate intuition or timing. Some lessons must be learned in practice, under pressure, with responsibility for life and death guiding every choice. Kane watched her and understood perfectly. She was not seeking glory or fame, only efficacy, only precision, only responsibility. And that made her remarkable. In the following weeks, Elena began working selectively with elite units. She trained small groups, teaching observation, pattern recognition, and anticipatory decision-making. She demonstrated methods of precision engagement under dynamic conditions, emphasizing timing, discipline, and psychological assessment of opponents. Every session revealed new insights to the operator's techniques that could mean the difference between life and death in the field. Her reputation continued to grow. Soldiers, Marines, and officers began referring to her presence as transformative. Her lessons were no longer theoretical. They were proven in the desert, in live operations, and her methodology had already saved lives. Yet Elena remained understated, refusing recognition beyond what was necessary for operational effectiveness. One evening, Kane met her on the base's observation deck, watching the sun dip below the horizon. You've changed everything, he said softly. Not just for us, but for every operation that follows. You've set a new standard. Elena looked at the fading light, contemplative. A standard is only valuable if it's applied responsibly. Skill alone does not save lives. Timing, discipline, and judgment do. The methods can be taught. The responsibility cannot. Kane nodded, impressed once again by her clarity. And yet, some will try to replicate you anyway. Let them try, she replied quietly. But there will always be variables they cannot predict. Combat is never perfect. That is why the lessons must be applied with respect, caution, and awareness. Precision without responsibility is deadly. The base grew quiet around them as the sun disappeared, leaving only the pale glow of the moon. For Elena, the battlefield had shifted from the desert to the minds of operators, to the strategy rooms, to the training grounds. Her influence was subtle, deliberate, and already transformative. And yet, in the back of her mind, the question remained: how far would she allow herself to be drawn into formalized operations? How much influence could she exert without compromising the autonomy that made her effective in the first place? For now, Elena Ramirez continued to teach, to guide, and to act where necessary. The legend of the civilian who had outshot SEAL snipers and dismantled an entire enemy squad lived on, spreading quietly among those who had witnessed her skill firsthand. And though she operated in the shadows of recognition, she had already changed the future of operations, one precise, deliberate, life-saving action at a time. The sun had barely risen when the call came in. A high-risk operation had erupted in a hostile region. A hostile force had taken control of the strategic outpost, and intelligence indicated that the enemy was organized, heavily armed, and prepared to repel any assault. The SEAL team, now seasoned and battle-weary, prepared for insertion. At their center was Elena Ramirez, a civilian-turned-legend whose precision, foresight, and calm under fire had already rewritten what they thought possible. Chief Kane briefed the team on the chopper, the wind whipping through their gear. "Intel says the outpost is fortified," he said. "Enemy has perimeter defenses, snipers, and reinforcements on standby. Standard infiltration is risky, very risky. But we have a chance if we coordinate." Elena listened silently, scanning the satellite maps, noting elevations, wind patterns, cover positions, and potential escape routes. Her mind was a chessboard of angles and vectors. She didn't speak immediately, allowing the team to absorb the plan. Then, with deliberate precision, she outlined modifications to the insertion approach, the sniper positions, and the timing of suppression. "Adjust the elevation on Alpha Sniper," she said, pointing at a ridge marked on the map. "Wind currents are shifting slightly east. You'll need to compensate 21 clicks at 600 meters. Bravo, suppress from the southern ridge, but stagger your bursts to avoid synchronization. Any predictable rhythm, and they'll adapt. Timing is critical. Coordination is critical. Survival is critical." The SEALs, accustomed to taking orders from seasoned leaders, followed her recommendations with a mixture of awe and skepticism. But when Kane gave her a subtle nod, their respect solidified. Elena Ramirez wasn't just giving advice, she was dictating the operation with the authority of someone who had lived and survived in war's chaos. As the helicopters approached the landing zone, the desert below stretched out, dust and rock, illuminated by the rising sun. Enemy patrols moved in predictable patterns, unaware that every step was being calculated, anticipated, and countered by a woman they couldn't see. Elena's scope had already been mounted on a position overlooking the valley, but she remained mobile, checking alternate vantage points, plotting angles, and anticipating the unpredictable. The insertion was flawless. The SEALs moved swiftly, following Elena's guidance. Suppression bursts erupted in precisely timed intervals, drawing attention away from the main approach. Enemy fire flared, but it was disoriented, uncoordinated. Every muzzle flash became an opportunity, every movement a target. Elena's finger rested lightly on the trigger. Ready? One enemy emerged from a tower, scanning the valley. Crack, the figure collapsed. A second peeked from a window. Crack. Another downed. Kane watched, heart pounding, as the impossible unfolded before him. Even the most experienced snipers in his team could not match this precision, this anticipation. Elena's calculations were flawless timing, trajectory, wind, and human behavior all integrated into one lethal symphony. Minutes stretched like hours. The outpost was methodically dismantled. Enemy forces tried to regroup, but Elena had anticipated every movement. She moved along her elevated positions, rifle trained, eyes scanning every shadow, every glint of light, every potential angle. No target escaped her notice. "Perimeter clear," she said softly, after neutralizing a group attempting a flank maneuver. Her voice was calm, almost serene, in stark contrast to the chaos below. The SEALs advanced, securing the outpost and coordinating with extraction points. Elena moved alongside them, her presence a stabilizing force. Every operator followed her lead, their confidence bolstered by her impeccable judgment. But the mission wasn't over. Intelligence indicated a final, heavily armed squad was attempting a counterattack from the western ridge. Elena paused, scanning the terrain. She calculated trajectory, elevation, wind, and enemy behavior in a fraction of a second. "Final squad," she whispered. 10 targets, spread out, moving fast. "They'll take cover behind rocks at 50, then shift left at 30. Timing critical." She raised her rifle, synchronized with the team's suppressive fire. Crack, crack, crack. Each enemy fell precisely as anticipated. The sequence executed flawlessly. Kane exhaled, sweat cooling on his brow. She's untouchable," he murmured. Elena didn't respond. Her focus remained absolute. Another target emerged, a leader, attempting to rally survivors. She tracked him through the scope, calculated the angle, and fired. The enemy leader fell, and with him, the morale of the remaining combatants disintegrated completely. By noon, the outpost was secure. Not a single SEAL had been injured. The enemy forces were neutralized or captured. Elena had orchestrated the entire operation, combining lethal precision with tactical foresight, guiding the team, and executing critical shots that no one else could have achieved. As helicopters evacuated the team, Kane finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. "I've seen wars fought in countless ways," he said quietly, leaning toward Elena. "I've seen courage, skill, and discipline. But what you just did? That changes everything." Elena looked out over the desert, expression calm. "It's not about me," she replied. "It's about survival, precision, and responsibility. Skill is only as valuable as its application." The team returned to base, debriefed, and the news spread rapidly. Elena Ramirez was now more than a legend. She was a case study, a symbol of possibility. Analysts dissected her movements, strategists incorporated her methods into training, and her presence became a quietly revered force within elite operations. Yet for Elena, the battle was not about fame. She continued her work, teaching operators, refining techniques, and maintaining vigilance. Each mission she touched became safer, more efficient, and more precise. She remained disciplined, focused, and calm, a constant reminder that exceptional skill could emerge from unexpected places. One evening, Kane approached her again, the weight of admiration evident in his tone. "You've changed the way we fight, Elena. Not just today, but every day from now on. And it's not just about skill. It's about timing, foresight, and responsibility. That's what makes the difference." Elena nodded quietly. "And that's what should always guide action," she said. "Technique alone is not enough. Judgment is everything." Kane studied her in the fading light. "And yet, you've shown that one person, just one, can make a difference that no number of troops could replicate. Even the snipers, even the best-trained operators, they couldn't do what you did." She didn't smile, but a faint acknowledgement passed her lips. "Then they will learn, and those who follow will apply what they've seen. But the responsibility always rests with the individual. No one else can carry it for you. As night fell over the base, Elena Ramirez walked alone along the observation deck, looking out at the desert she had once mastered under fire. The legend she had built, quiet, unassuming, but undeniable, would ripple through military history. For years to come, she had survived impossible odds, outshot the best, and guided elite forces to victory. She had done it not for glory, but for precision, discipline, and the sanctity of human life. And as the stars emerged over the desert, her eyes reflected the same calm determination that had carried her through every mission, every shot, every impossible moment. Elena Ramirez, the civilian, the master marksman, the strategist, the one who outshot the SEAL snipers and dismantled entire enemy squads, had become more than a story. She had become a legacy defined by skill, responsibility, and the unwavering belief that one person's precision could tip the scales of fate.